You're watching Taking Stock. Good evening. I am Bruce Whitfield. It's that time of the month where we look back at a month of huge eventfulness and try and figure out what the month ahead looks like. It's practically impossible. From F&B Wealth and Investments, we've got Wayne McCurrie and the Managing Director of Vestact, Paul Theron, joining us as well. Can the world, Paul Theron, get any more mad than it is? Impeachment proceedings against Donald Trump, Boris Johnson being forced to reinstate his parliament, Brexit in shambles. Pick a fight. There's a fight in every corner of the world right now.
Well, you know, there usually is. The world can always get stranger, and politics creates the backdrop against which markets have to then react. Truly, companies, of course, continue to thrive and do business. Economies go up and down, central banks go up and down. You know, it's just the usual canvas. I don't think you should worry too much about it.
But I think that's the point, Wayne. I mean, isn't that the point, in that there is so much noise that, I don't know, 5 years ago, perhaps markets would have been in panic and there would have been turmoil with the president facing impeachment and a parliament in chaos. Yet markets seem to be fairly stable and muddling along.
Look, Bruce, I think a president facing impeachment doesn't necessarily upset markets. If Donald Trump imposes full trade wars on China, that's far more important for markets than whether he's impeached or not. So by and large, politics, unless politics infringes on the economy, the markets generally just ignore it, quite frankly. So, I mean, obviously Brexit affects the UK economy, but a president being impeached or some spy scandal or something, as long as it doesn't affect the economy or markets, the markets won't actually even worry. And of course, it's human nature to remember the immediate past far more clearer than the distant past. This has happened many times before. The world has gone through turmoil many, many times, and I mean, we're still here.
I mean, our South African lens, though, politics is at the centre of our existence, or at least we're told politics is at the centre of our existence. Our news bulletins are dominated by it. Our newspapers are dominated by it. If we could ignore the politics and allow the business of business to be business, then perhaps we'd be in a far better shape.
Off, yeah. But look, I mean, even if you evaluate that now, obviously the South African situation is not positive, clearly not. But understand, we're still far more influenced with what happens overseas than what happens domestically.
So do we need to be worrying about any of the big flags overseas beyond the trade wars? Trade wars are the scariest thing of all. Just talking to some farmers over the weekend, and their wool prices have plummeted as a result of these trade wars. Suddenly China's saying, well, we'll stop importing wool for a bit, and wool prices for these farmers in the Karoo have fallen.
Well, you know, you could actually even make the case that with the US presidential election coming up and Trump desperately seeking re-election, it could be that the trade war gets resolved because he's now under political pressure with impeachment and so on, so he's going to be looking for easy wins. And as we know, the trade war isn't really happening because the Chinese, you know, put their hands up or decided to do anything unusual. They've been carrying on in their inscrutable way all along. It's the US's response or Trump's instigation of the trade tariffs and so on that has caused this. So I think the market, you know, towards the end of September was edging higher, close back to all-time highs, the US market, that is, perhaps because there's an anticipation that that thing may, you know, edge off.
I mean, this thing of America first, and this was his war cry, his rallying cry. This is what got him elected in the first place, America first, and trade wars are about America first because we must bring jobs home, we must create at home. May very well backfire very seriously if he pushes too hard for it.
But if you look at the irony of Make America Great Again, MAGA. America was great long before he was elected. It had the biggest economy in the world. It had a roaring stock market. It had record low unemployment, low interest rates, low inflation. So how he could sell that somehow America is damaged and we got to make it great again, when it was actually probably in the last 10 years
in better shape than it is now.
Better shape than what it's been in before the 30 years before that. But yet he managed to sell it. And in fact, he was almost on a hiding when he was elected, because it actually couldn't get much better than what it was. So, and when you can't get much better, you normally go down a little bit, and the economy is slowing a little bit, and you know he's under quite a bit of domestic pressure. But yet that's what he sold. And when you look at the soya bean farmers, they say, well, thank you for the $30 billion subsidy. The problem is we're losing $60 billion.
Yeah, because we can't export our soybeans to China. I mean, is your sort of favorite destination remaining the United States markets, Paul? I mean, the S&P 500, you're a big fan of its components. You're a big fan of the big tech companies in the US?
Yeah, I think every South African financial services provider has seen strong demand for offshore products. Certainly the US companies are also the largest, most well-capitalized. They are increasingly global. I mean, we had results out from Nike last week, which is interesting because it's a little bit out of sequence with the rest of US earnings season. Very strong growth in China. So it's interesting how you can use an entry point into those companies to actually get excellent global exposure.
I mean, but again, globalization is now almost a dirty word in some spheres. Globalization's been a thing since the Chinese went up the Yangtze. I mean, before that, I mean, ever since Britain colonized Hong Kong, for example, I mean, since the Dutch East India Company, since before that, I mean, the world has been becoming increasingly integrated. To try and break a mechanism that has served the planet.
I think Trump is an aberration. I think the global trend is towards more trade, towards more open markets, towards more open, even labor markets. So I think these last gasp wrigglings of the sort of jingoistic tendencies of an older generation will soon be behind us. Maybe I'm getting a little optimistic here, but I think you've got to see the big picture, and the big picture is increasingly an integrated global economy.
It has to be, but we're seeing also the US come under pressure. Growth is coming under pressure. Unemployment is still at record lows. It's doing brilliantly. Wage rates have been going up slowly. Europe is trying to stimulate growth in the Eurozone. We've got Britain and Brexit, and Boris Johnson really taking no prisoners in his approach to try and secure Brexit by the 31st of October. That's the end of the month. I mean, breaking a union that's been in place for 50 years. I mean, these are things that are quite scary. Should we, down here a million miles away, be at all concerned?
No, of course we must be. I mean, understand Brexit, it does have an effect, but it's nothing like the US and trade wars in China. It is a far smaller effect. It's got a very focused effect. All the UK property companies, Investec, throw in a few more companies than that. It definitely has an effect, but it's not nearly as big as the trade wars and what happens in the US and China for South Africa in particular, because of the effect on commodity prices, world trade. Brexit can never push the world into a recession, never.
Okay, well, that's a piece of good news. We'll pick up on that in a moment because I want to know about South African companies with operations in the UK. You've mentioned, of course, Investec, which has got a big asset management business there, and they've delayed the breakup of Investec in the bank and asset management business. There's Brait, and Christo Wiese rattling there for reform of Brait, of course, which has cost him a lot of money, less than Steinhoff, but still a lot of money. And there are a whole bunch of other South African companies. We have direct ties into that market because for so many years, South African companies have diversified businesses into the UK. What happens in the UK does have an impact on many of the investments that you might have on the JSE. We'll pick up on that in a moment.